Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Laden Neurotech.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Yannick Roy, and he is the founder of NeurotechX. And if you know anything about wearable BCI, this community, it's the biggest Slack channel and community in the world for especially wearable BCIs. So you're actually still in your PhD. And so it's surprising that somebody with such a big impact is still being taught as well. But it is kindred spirits that you have an audience and you're still going through school, because I'm in the same situation. But anyways, Yannick, pleasure to have you on the show, and bienvenue on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I've been listening to your podcast for years. So I'm happy to finally be a guest on the show.
Excellent. So do you want to introduce yourself and talk a little about NeurotechX as well as some of your other stuff?
Yeah, as you mentioned, co-founder of NeurotechX. I've been in the neurotech space for over 12 years. I'm an engineer by training, did computer engineering, then transitioned to electrical engineering. And then for my master, I was in brain imaging, multimodal fusion, and then transitioned to my PhD in the psychophysics side of things. So an engineer with a PhD in neuro, which is not necessarily the most common things, but I've been passionate by technology and the brain for many years, which led me to start NeurotechX, actually BCI Montreal, a local community in Montreal back in 2014. The idea with that community was really, I'm interested in BCI. I'm interested in the future. This thing is not going anywhere anytime soon. This will only grow. How can I get connected with the people in the space? How can I discuss and meet people? And just by virtue of networking, educating myself and anticipating where the future is going. And so with no big vision necessarily, back in 2014, we started with a small group in Montreal, what we call BCI Montreal, starting doing some events. And then we realized that each city should have a BCI city something, and they should have a local community discussing about this emerging field of BCI. Nowadays, with the Elon Musk and Facebook announcing kind of their venture in the space and the BCI world, it's a bit more mainstream. But if we go back to 2014, it wasn't as mainstream as it is now in terms of neurotech, and the BCI is that kind of like are there jobs? Are there companies? Is there money? So the people in the field doing research, they knew that this field existed, and they knew, like with the Brain Initiative, started in 2013. And in 2014, we were starting to see other brain initiatives elsewhere. But people in the field knew it was coming, but for outsider, it wasn't as obvious. So with BCI Montreal, we realized that it would make sense to have a larger community, but also that there would be value in connecting those local community into something a bit more global and international. Hence, in 2015, we started NeurotechX. So we renamed, we thought about BCIX, but we decided to go a bit broader than just BCI, but the whole neurotech field. So it became NeurotechX, where the X would be for a city, the initiative. So it's Neurotech something. So that was the initial inception. We started with chapters in San Francisco, Toronto, New York, quickly Boston joined in, and kind of in a matter of a year, it blew up a little bit, where we had to slow down the growth because we were not we wouldn't have any outside funding, government funding or anything. So we needed to bootstrap everything. The organization was and still is mainly volunteer driven. And so it's awesome when you grow, but when you go too fast in a field where credibility and it's neurotechnology, it's not gonna, so you want to make sure that you have your science and like the message and the information you disseminate is of high quality. So you cannot just scale too quick and onboard a bunch of people that are not necessarily well educated of the field. So we wanted to be careful with that, and also resources, and also legal aspect, and the fact that we're doing events in other cities. What does that mean in terms of money, financial aspect, and all these things? So we had to slow down the chapter a little bit, and that led us also to look at other initiatives and create other things that the community would want. So just before I go into, because I could talk about NeurotechX in detail for too long, but just so that it's a bit structured, going back to what is NeurotechX, it's a non-for-profit. It's an international organization. The mission of the organization is to facilitate the advancement of neurotechnology, which is quite ambitious and wide at the same time. What is neurotechnology? We could spend time of defining that. So we do that by focusing on three pillars: community, education, and innovation. So basically community, we bring people together to different initiatives like chapters, Slack, as you mentioned. So we bring people together so that they're well connected. They know other people in the space. Education through different initiatives as well, where we want to educate people, whether it's on the scientific aspect, on the engineering aspect, on the technical coding kind of thing. Is it more on the ethical aspect, which is relevant and important? Is it more on the business aspect? So really 360 of the field. And then we believe that if we're successful at connecting people, educating people, then they can go on and have an impact on the field and innovate. So whether by creating their own startup, by joining a group, by tackling challenges that remain unsolved in the field, etc. So we see NeurotechX as a funnel, as a journey where regardless of your level of seniority in the space, you will find something with NeurotechX that will bring you value, and you can evolve over time with NeurotechX and have an impact. If we're able to do that at scale, time after time, then we'll be able to look back 10 years from now and look back and say that we had a very ROI positive on the field, and therefore that we're achieving our mission, which is to facilitate the advancement of neurotech.
Yeah, very cool. I think it's very impressive. And I'm looking here, 30 chapters around the world, 26 student clubs, 17,000 plus on Meetup, 6,000 plus on Slack. So it seems like your meetups are the especially popular thing and that people show up to in-person events. So especially in the beginning and then maybe now as it's evolved, what do people do when they meet up? Do they just talk about how much they love neurotech or like what's the agenda for most meetings?
Yeah, it's very different. And this is, I think, the beauty of NeurotechX is it's really community driven, and we have different, I want to say culture, but there is like a different DNA to different chapters and different events. So we do, for example, smaller events that we call hack nights, where a handful of people, a smaller group get together more on the technical side of things. So physical hack nights where when we could meet in person pre-COVID, we get together and like people were hacking on different projects. So more on the technical side of things where they would work on projects, hack on some of these wearable devices, EEG devices that you mentioned earlier, and like build projects. So usually it's not like a large group, it's a smaller group that meets on a regular basis to make progress. So think about hackathons, but at very small scale, but recurrent. So every week or 2 weeks, then they do like a mini hackathon, if you will, to make progress and develop some skills and meet some people. So these are like what we call hack nights. We also have
What is a hack night? What do you do? Do you like build something or what's the result at the end of a hack night?
At the end of one hack night, not much. It's a project that kind of like move forward. So whether it's, let's build a web app with this EEG device because I want to measure my concentration level, or I want to do a machine learning that will train based on 2 states that will classify with my BCI. So the chapter usually have some devices like OpenBCI, Muse, and we can start hacking on these devices. So we get together and we work on a project. Each chapter propose and suggest different projects, different idea that some of the members of the community would want to work on. And some good ideas kind of like stemmed out of that. For example, what we have right now as a big project is EEG notebooks. So the EEG notebooks is a Python suite for psychophysics experiment, BCI experiments. And we're about actually to run a crowdsourcing experiment where people all over the world will be able to collect EEG data and run experiments online. So this is being spearheaded by University of Toronto with the ethical committee. This is becoming like a real scientific project that stem out of let's build some tools to classify and provide tools where people can do this P300 experiment in a very kind of, I have a Muse headset, and then I just get the Python Jupyter notebook, and then I can get started with doing some BCI experiment. So that's one example. Another example that the hack night started, and then it became a bigger project, is the BCI 101 application. So that's an iOS an Android application. Now it needs to be updated. It's deprecated now. It hasn't been updated, but a few years ago, the project went to SFN as well to be presented as a really good educational tool. On Android store, it got 10,000 downloads at some point. Now it probably reached way more than that, where basically you take your phone, you take your Muse headset, and you in real time what a BCI is. So you see your brain activity, and then we make you blink on your phone that you're blinking, and then we make you relax. You see your alpha wave, and then we train you to have 2 different states, and then your phone will open and close the light. So you basically just build your own BCI on your cell phone with the Muse headset. So that was like a very good educational tool. A lot of universities like use that for undergrads and some classes in the space. So these are the kind of project where someone launched an idea and then it becomes a project. Sometimes it's small, spend a few hack nights. For example, in Montreal for a while, we did a lot of deep learning for EEG. So we did a lot of coding around like classifying EEG signal with deep learning, for example. So we spent a lot of weeks and just then we would get together the same core, and then some people would join, some people would leave and come back 2 weeks later, and then skip a month and then come back. It's really like organic, and it's really technical by nature, this kind of smaller events. Okay. So for now, for the past year and a half, it's been really online, I would say. So the famous San Francisco Hack Nights, this is like a bit of a nice story because it started in San Francisco in a garage, which it's like the symbol of, I would say, hackers and DIY, where people would meet in a garage in San Francisco and hack away. So that was the early days, 2015, 16, 17. Then with COVID, the San Francisco Hack Nights evolved with the online events, where obviously it was a bit more hands-on. So people wouldn't necessarily code and work on projects, but they would more talk about the news, the recent things that happen, and go more on the technical aspect and scientific. So we have like very highly qualified and highly educated people in the space, and they would talk about what's the recent news and go deeper in some of the devices, some of the tech, some of the science that came. So we're really excited to see this through COVID. I think that the San Francisco Hack Nights did something like 60 weeks in a row or something like that without missing one. So that was like a big milestone. I think they did a bit more than that, but I remember at like the year mark, that was like a big achievement for a full year. Hack Night in Paris as well. This is like a big thing in Paris as well, the Paris group. So the DNA, the culture, the projects really varies depending on the group. The idea here is really that these events should be smaller and more technical by nature, as opposed to networking events, the regular meetup that people have in mind, where the sizes of these events that we do on a regular basis, regular, like every 2 months, 3 months per city, give or take. These events is the goal of that is to discuss a bit of the science, the news, but really networking events. So like a 2-3 hours kind of events, evening events, where you go and you get a bit of networking, get a bit of knowledge in the space, you get some talks, some panels, these kinds of things. There isn't one specific team. We like to cover the field like 360. So some chapters, sometimes we'll talk about more on the ethics aspect, then machine learning, then deep learning, then more on the like the big news, like the Elon Musk projects, Facebook, kind of like these bit more buzzy, like trendy news. So it really depends, but within one city, we like that over time, if you've been in the chapter for like 2 years, you've seen a bit of everything. So that if you're more scientific, you had some talks and kind of some event to attend that were more scientific. If you're more business oriented, then you had some meetups that were a bit more business, talking about IP, fundraising, startups, these kinds of things. If you're a bit more technical, then you probably attended some of the talks that were more on the engineering side of things, more on the technical aspect. So these are regular meetup. In terms of events, we've done like bigger events as well, kind of more on the conference side of things, hackathons with like a weekend long, 200 people, something, these kinds of events. So really different sizes just to try to address different needs of the community. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So actually, what is a typical size of a meetup? And then does it go like 4 a.m, or what does it usually look like?
So what we like that we've seen that works really well, I would say, is like the 30 people meetup events. That number works well because it's really easy to put together. It brings value because people start knowing their community. It's small, where we can do a round of introductions so people can introduce themselves, which for event at 75 people plus, we cannot really do because it just takes an hour just to introduce people. But really, since the idea of the meetup are not the content itself, like the talks and the content is like an excuse to get together at the end of the day. The content is nice, but the real value is meeting people locally and talking with people. So really focus on that aspect. And this is why like the 30 something people from 20 to 50, I would say kind of like that's a really good range. Lower than 20, the thing is that you feel that it's not a lot of people. So some people are like, is it worth my time? It's like a smaller thing. I thought that it was like a bigger thing. I've heard about NeurotechX, this big international thing, and they're doing like event with just a handful of people. Did they miss their marketing or something? So too small feels a bit too small. Too big, then we lose the value of the community getting together and getting to know each other a bit more. So if we go bigger, then you might as well go really bigger and then create like a big event for the sake of creating a big event with talks and like bigger things. So the event that we like to do is 2 hours there's 3 hours kind of thing in the evening, 6 to 8, 6 to 9, 7 to 9 kind of thing in the evening. You go there after work. There is some kind of like refreshments and kind of thing. You get together. There's a few talks, and then there is a networking session. And then some of the people will probably go at a bar after, because we have the venue until 9, 10, something like that. And then we need to leave, and a handful of people, between 5 to 10 people, will continue the discussion at a bar because they're really inspired about that, and they are caught into a very interesting discussion. And that's what we see happen.
Those are the best discussions is at the bar. Yeah, so this is really interesting.
And where you meet, and where kind of like the friends and the good connections really happens. The same thing at conferences. You meet people and you talk at the coffee machine, and that's awesome. Then we know each other, but the magic really happens when, let's go to the bar and let's continue talking. And then, we don't just know each other, but we'll reach out to one another later for opportunity, for work, for collaboration, things like that. And this is like really what, if you do that year after year, then suddenly you have a really strong network that you can rely on, who to call. And when you call these people, they reply, they answer. So that's where like you create a lot of value, I think, by strengthening their, more than just, I've got a business card from that person at that event, which is a very weak connection at the end of the day.
Exactly. You might not remember them that well. So this is really cool. Okay. So if somebody wants to open up a chapter, there are 30 chapters around the world. So there is a high chance that somebody has started one in your area. But if you were to want to start one, what would that look like? You had mentioned funding. Do you have to find some kind of venue to be able to do this? And you have to put together some kind of curriculum or agenda? What's the starter package that you give to a new chapter to be like, okay, now you're going to start and you're going to be able to create something new in your area?
Yep. Very good question. So the chapters have a bit of a life cycle, I would say, in the sense that at first they are considered like a tier 1, like a smaller chapter, and the expectations are a bit smaller, the kind of like the size of event. So you start smaller, and then as the chapter grows, then the chapters probably have first more resources because they are more well-known in their city. They have had impact. So now they can go after sponsorship or even like grants and things like that from government, these kinds of things for going for bigger events. And when they do marketing and they do reach out to invite people, they have more contact lists, they have more partners, they have more affiliation, like universities that they know, PIs that they can reach out and invite people. But at first you need to start somewhere. Like you need to start with a small group, and then it evolves. So the expectations at the beginning are a bit smaller. So the first steps is there already a chapter in your city? If yes, then might join, because we don't want to have like different chapters, different teams with the same branding. Doesn't make sense. So if there is no chapter in your city, you will reach out to NeurotechX. We'll connect you with the Connectome team, which is like the group handling all the chapters activity. Brian Jenkins is spearheading that initiative with his team. And then you will have a call, kind of a one-on-one. If you're one person reaching out and saying, hey, I want to start a chapter, I'm interested. And then there will be like an interview process to make sure that your values and like your vision is aligned with what NeurotechX is about. We've had, for example, a bit of a one-man show, people reaching out to NeurotechX, where the real vision of the people is actually to promote their business. So they want to create like a chapter for NeurotechX, but for their own benefit. We try to avoid that. We really want people that are there I want to nurture a community. Yes, via NeurotechX and via this endeavor, you will benefit as an individual in the space because you'll be connected really fast. Your network will grow really fast. So there is a lot of individual benefits of doing that. But we want to make sure that the vision and what the reason why you're doing that is really for the community and for the space. So there will be an interview, and then there will be a couple of steps, like next steps, for example, finding the core team at the beginning, and then trying to look for, what the first event will look like, what kind of connections, what kind of venue can we go for? And then NeurotechX, the core team with the Connectome, will help you through these steps to make sure that you can get like the first event and the first steps, the branding, the creation of the meetup group, things like that. So we'll cover all the fees. Obviously, the volunteers in the chapter itself doesn't have to pay anything. There is no cost affiliated with that. There's no franchise model kind of thing, but it's a volunteer position as well. So that the chapter leads are not being paid to do the chapters. It's like a volunteer position starting a chapter. And then we'll talk about what the first event might look like. What we like to do is the onboarding at the beginning of the year. For example, start late the year before, and the first event doing it early at the year, because we've started our new flagship events, which are called the Neurotech Buzz in Review, where in January, all the chapters are doing an event recapping the year prior. So everything that you should know that happened the year before that. So if you are interested in neurotech, this is like the best 2 or 3 hours that you can spend in a year, because we're going to recap everything that you might have missed that you should know about big fundraising that happened, big projects like when Facebook announced their in 2017 that they would go into the BCI space, big breakthrough in science, big companies that you should know about. So these kinds of things. So really, we're packing the year before that in an event. So that's the perfect first event for a chapter. Because in this event, like the marketing, we have a lot of resources and there's a big momentum around that. It's a good timing as well. So usually we like to do the onboarding within that event, but it doesn't have to be. It really, we discuss about what is the first event, and then we'll help and work with the team to get that first event and then reassess, okay, what's next? So we like to onboard new people, new team members during that first event. So people that showed up at that event might be interested in joining the team and the chapter to build this community. So it really evolves organically. We have a lot of best practices, like standards, like we've been doing this for quite a while. So we know what worked, what didn't work. And then we work with the chapter, the people. We've seen different flavor, for example, in terms of venues. Some of them, if they have connection with universities, sometimes it works really well to have venue at universities. Some of them are more connected in the co-working spaces, and they have kind of like areas. And we did a lot of at WeWork, for example, like in Boston, we leverage a lot of the WeWork spaces that there in Montreal, same thing as well. So this is the kind of venue that worked well. Like they have this open space, they usually have beer on tap, these kinds of things. So these are the kind of venue really go with the city, with the resources, with the connection of the team. And then we try to make the best event organically possible.
Yeah, very cool. Sounds like, yeah, you guys have best practices. Obviously you've done this a lot, so you know what works and what doesn't, so you can pass
so what you get, yeah, exactly. What you get by joining NeurotechX, kind of obviously the branding, the family, all the other initiative, the synergy of all that we're doing, because we've talked about the chapter, but we have many other initiatives as well and other things which create like the synergy and the magic behind NeurotechX. So what you get is all that, but all the past experience of the people running and all the thing that kind of like to accelerate and not do the mistakes necessarily. So there's like a lot of a event manager training 101 that just happens by virtue of discussions and okay, do this, do that. And here are like a couple of examples that worked really well. So there is a lot of that knowledge that gets transferred to the new people joining in chapters.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you had mentioned money that you'd be funding or help fund some of the first groups in a new chapter. And I think you guys also, was it true that you helped fund the BCI guys, the YouTube channel from that launched like a year ago? They had like lectures and idea conceptual videos about brain computer interfaces and everything like this. So have you been funded or where is the money coming from? Or is this coming out of your personal pocket?
Yeah. So NeurotechX outside, we don't have like major funding. We have a little kind of sponsorship is like number one revenue, I would say, through events and like larger things, the student clubs and things like that. We have amazing partners in the space. Money, like that always been the number one. I don't want to say stopper of NeurotechX, but the growth and the impact could be bigger should we have access to like big major funding from either government or philanthropists. And this is like what the next step of NeurotechX is about, going after more money to have a better impact. Now that we've validated the thesis of NeurotechX and the impact, now it makes sense. We can have impact. All the volunteers that came through the organization that gave their time, their effort, their energy in building NeurotechX into what it is now, it's pretty much validated. There is a need for us in that space. There is interest in participating, pushing this machine, this wheel that basically at first we just started the wheel and now it's kind of like it's running. So now the next steps is not about validating. We know what the field needs because we've been there, we've listened to people, we've had thousands of people coming and saying, it would be nice to have this, thanks for this, because of NeurotechX, I've met people. So we know the value that we can provide. And now we just want to amplify that year after year and just continue in that impacting. So the next step is really for us going up after bigger money. We can have bigger impact. So going back to, do we fund projects? We don't fund projects per se, unless the project, like we really see value for NeurotechX ourselves, because we don't have enough money to just sustain ourselves and start funding other projects just for the sake of the field. We would love to, because that's aligned with our mission, trying to facilitate the space. So obviously would love to fund and help others, but obviously we're focusing more on sustaining ourselves. So initiatives that are like the chapters, for example, will absorb the cost with NeurotechX, with the organization for the branding, kind of, for example, stickers, t-shirts, banners, meetup costs, and all these things. So that would like everything within NeurotechX, the volunteers definitely don't have to pay anything. And then as the chapter grows, there will be a bit of a pressure to be a bit more sustainable in like in the sponsorship, for example. You want to do the events in a big venue. NeurotechX, the mother entity, the headquarters cannot just start funding and paying for all the events necessarily. So the events will start to be some self-sustainable, which makes sense at a larger scale. So yeah, but we will cover obviously all the fees and all the costs from all the initiatives that we're doing as a sustainable organization. So yeah, initially there was a lot of personal commitment, I won't lie, in the early days. Now we're in a better space that we used to be in terms of resources, sponsorship. We also have NeurotechX Services now as a for-profit separate leg that is generating revenues for NeurotechX. And so we're getting in a better position. We have more because the logo, obviously the aura of the logo is I would say shining more and more. So it's easier to get a bit more resources. And long story short, not necessarily funding outside project. We get a lot of requests. It breaks my heart every time when we need to say no. I would like to be able to help a bit more money wise, but for now we're focusing on resources in-house to make sure we can have a greater impact. That's like our own contribution with our resources.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. Yeah, money's always an issue. Money's always you could always use more money.
But for us, it was a good value, good money, yes. But as any startup knows or don't know because they wish they had more money, but any investors know actually that more money isn't necessarily a good thing, because when you have more money or too much money, then you're not necessarily smart about spending that money. What's being very bootstrap early on, what it forced us to do is really validate our volunteers really willing to push this and put their time. If we had money, it would have been really easy to build a team. And if we're just like throwing money and you join NeurotechX and it's super easy to do everything, you get paid, you have like crazy venue, free beer, like everything, and we just pay for everything. It's easy to build something, but are you really providing value? That's harder to measure because yes, people will show up to your event, like you're eating fancy food in a big venue, and it's flashy, but are you really having an impact? That's harder to measure when you have like a lot of resources, a lot of money. As the opposite, if you're on a bootstrap, you don't have to create like a very fancy venue. You don't have a lot of unlimited food and things like that. You don't pay, and everything is a bit of bootstrap, and you have volunteers putting their time and effort to push that. If you're successful in that framework, then you know that you're actually delivering way more value. So at the early day of NeurotechX, it was really about validating that thesis first, which money doesn't help you necessarily validate. So it was a good thing. Now that we've validated, now we know what we could do with money. So now it would be a good timing now, better than in the early days of NeurotechX to get a bit more funding, because now we would spend that money in a smart way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I felt this same thing. Actually, I used to throw parties when I was doing my master's in Germany. And of course, people will come for a party with free food, free beer. But then I had to charge a little bit, €5, some small amount. And so that's when okay, you have to open up your wallet and then you can come. So how committed are you for that? Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about NeurotechX Services? We will be having some guests for that later on. But just briefly, do you want to describe what this is?
Yeah. Well, so just what led to NeurotechX Services. So we mentioned chapters, and we mentioned the three pillars of the organization: community, education, innovation. And really the DNA of NeurotechX is we're really bottom up. So what we like to do is to ask everybody in the network, through different events, through Slack, like over and over again, what is missing in the space that could improve and help accelerate your impact in the field. So what is missing that could accelerate your career in the space and therefore your impact? And once we start hearing that over the same answers over and over, then we know that as a community, we should put something together to address that needs, because we know that this is a real need that could help people have a greater impact in the field. And so this DNA is really what defines NeurotechX as a bottom-up organization. And all the initiatives that we've been doing are based on that thesis when we receive that feedback that something is missing. So therefore, we should put something together. A good example of that are the student clubs. So you mentioned 26 plus student clubs. We're 30 something at this point, and that's going to grow rapidly. Next year, my target is 50 student clubs in different universities and like in remote area as well, in different countries, not just the US, Europe of the world, but also being more inclusive in different, more remote areas. But the student club is a good example where we had a lot of undergrads coming within NeurotechX, coming to our events and Slack. And the questions were always, I'm just an undergrad in computer science. I'm just an undergrad in neuroscience. I'm interested in that. What can I do? And could I meet other people in my university? Can I start working on projects? Because as a grad student, you are in a lab working on that, and you have some connections, some contacts, at least your lab, your colleagues, your colleagues in your lab, and you're going to conferences. So you're in the neurotech system somehow. But as an undergrad, you're not. What you have is basically watching videos on YouTube and following up what's happening online, but you're not in the neurotech system, if you will. So a lot of people were asking, how can I get started faster as an undergrad? And so we started the Student Club initiative, where the idea was, okay, each university should have a neurotech student club where people will get together and discuss about neurotech, work on projects, do some events, do some outreach, connect with researchers at their university to talk and kind of self-organize events around neurotechnology. Some people might be more on the engineering side. Some people might be more on the neuroscience side. We don't really do wet neuroscience. Like NeurotechX is really neurotech focused. So we don't really do the biology too much, and the wet neuroscience, neurons on a dish, that kind of thing. So we try to focus a bit more on the tech side of things, because by trying to be like neurotech is exciting, but it's very, really wide. So if we try to be everybody in neuro-related fields, then obviously dilutes the value as a community because we're too wide. So the Student Club initiative is a good example where we started that. We started it back in 2015, and as a pilot project, started 4 student clubs in Montreal, 1 in Toronto, put an annual competition and legitimize the whole thing of having a student club. The first one was harder because the university was always asking, is that the thing? Like, are other universities doing that? Do they have like neurotech student club? And what are you going to do? So the first student clubs were a bit harder. And now, because there are so many student clubs, it's easy to point, like Berkeley has one, this university has one, McGill, and look at what they're doing. And NeurotechX is putting the framework to allow for that. So now it's easy. And now we're starting an exponential growth for student clubs. Unfortunately, COVID slowed down everything, because student clubs are meeting locally, physically at their university, as opposed to chapter, which is like a citywide endeavor. So the student club was one initiative. Another initiative, if I fast track, we have more than that, but if I try to keep it short, another initiative was people looking for jobs in the space. So we had a lot of people, what kind of skills should I develop to go in to work in neurotech? What are the companies hiring for neurotech? Are there jobs? Is it worth kind of me pursuing that path of neurotech? So we started putting together a job board. So trying to curate and get the information about what are the jobs in the space. And we had a lot of people on one side coming for job opportunities. And on the other side, we had more and more companies coming in our network and our events asking for talent that we're looking to hire. So we said, okay, how can we facilitate that? Once again, bottom up, we have the demand on both sides. How can we play a role in that space? So the first thing that we did was to start putting a job board and trying to facilitate to help recruiting, both with just a job board where it's there, we populate that, we put a lot. And now we're really happy because we have a lot of jobs on a regular basis. Every week we put many jobs, both on the academia side and industry side. It's the largest job board in neurotech in the world across platform, neurotech focus only. So it's very easy. There is not a bunch of noise. It's really neurotech focus. So we're really very happy about this initiative. The traffic is growing quite significantly. And how can we go the step after the job board, which is doing the recruiting? How can we help with recruiting and headhunting as a service? So initially, we started spearheading that within NeurotechX, but for many legal, financial reasons, we decided to put that on a separate entity, which basically NeurotechX Services licenses the branding of NeurotechX, and there is a revenue sharing that goes back to any dollar that NeurotechX Services is getting. There is a percentage flowing back to the non-for-profit to NeurotechX as the licensing agreement. And on top of recruiting, after that, what came is consulting. A lot of companies were coming our way and asking for consulting services. Can you help me either on the business side of things, on the technical side of things, building prototype projects up to full product, the commercialization, the manufacturing, supply chain, regulation studies. So really like 360. And the thesis behind NeurotechX Services is we have the NeurotechX community. We have experts in all fields all over the world. So can we help companies when they have a need, point in time with specific expertise required? We should be able to get the team, the expertise, and be able to address the needs and help the company. So this is like how the NeurotechX Services came to life with that demand. And NeurotechX Services is also scaling very well, more demand, more projects, both on the recruiting side of things, on the consulting side of things. And we validated that the system is working, where we actually, NeurotechX Services is hiring people from the NeurotechX ecosystem, which kind of creates this 360 ecosystem, which is the beauty and the synergy of NeurotechX and Neurotech.
Yeah, very cool. And yeah, like I said, I'm going to be having Adam on talk about that in a couple of weeks. So that should be cool. But yeah, so this is very exciting. I really like that you're taking this nonprofit NeurotechX and helping for the community. And then it almost sounds like crowdsourcing some of the stuff you get from that and being able to have it be profitable. So that's very wise, I think. So I guess for the final topic that I wanted to talk about is you've done all this while still in your PhD, right? Like and then before we started recording, you said you're also doing a teaching class. You're teaching a class at another university while doing all this. Is this something that's common? Is this something that was very difficult to do? And yeah, tell me a little bit about this. Like, how are you still a PhD student?
Why am I still a PhD student? I guess NeurotechX is the main reason. But yeah, I've been switching my PhD for a few years. Luckily, unfortunately, my supervisor, my PI, is very understood really early. From a career standpoint, NeurotechX will bring me more dividend than probably the PhD and my thesis itself. So that yes, I need the degree, but what NeurotechX and the positioning, the contact, the networks that I'm building with NeurotechX and the impact, that's very valuable. So he was really supportive of that. Maybe too much. Maybe he didn't put enough pressure for me to deliver, to finish a bit faster. So obviously, yeah, so I kind of NeurotechX and the number of hours and the time that I put obviously slowed down and delayed my PhD a little bit, which I was supposed to finish last year, but COVID hit. And so I had one more human experiment to do, and then all universities stopped anything related to human experiments. So delayed a little bit. So just a mixture of things. Now I'm kind of a bit focusing way more to finish by the end of the year. It's funny because you mentioned kind of it's not hard to believe that you're still a PhD and on many panels. Obviously, there is a lot of doctor, PhD, and everybody, and then suddenly Yannick Roy, which is not the doctor and the PhD. So it's been funny in a couple of panels where I've been introduced. And yeah, so it's just a matter of time. I've been I don't want to say not prioritizing my PhD, but NeurotechX was really fulfilling. So that's the thing. At some point doing your research, it's exciting, it's nice. But when you have this other thing on the side where you're receiving so many emails and so many messages of thank you for this, because of NeurotechX, I've met that person and we started a business. Because of NeurotechX, I've joined this lab. Because of NeurotechX, I found that job. I'm working there. And we have so many testimonials of beautiful stories that as an individual and human level, you have your research that you're doing, and you have all these messages and all the team that is believing in this, that is pushing that. So it's easier to get dragged into, okay, I'm going to work on this. And then you go back to your PhD and then you hit a wall of, this is hard. So I'm going to go back to NeurotechX. So I would say that what I've learned the most with the past couple of years trying to do both and other things has been mental discipline. That when you're trying to do two of the biggest mentally demanding challenge at the same time, you need to be very structured and prepared to do that. Otherwise, what ends up happening is that you do the small stuff on both, but you never do the hard stuff because you use the other one as an excuse. We're all a bit mentally lazy sometimes. So it's easy when you have a big challenge in your PhD that requires all your mental energy and focus for a long period of time, then you're just kind of, I'm going to do it later because now I have this little thing that I can finish with NeurotechX, for example. And then you switch vice versa and you use the other one as an excuse to not do the hard work on one. So I've learned a lot from a personal productivity, high-level achievement, I would say, by trying to do two big things. I would probably do things a bit different. I've wasted a bit of time by learning that, but that's part of the journey of starting a startup. You do a lot of mistakes. Starting a project like that with such ambition, you learn a lot during the journey. Same thing with a PhD. That's, I guess, the role of a PhD, trying to learn as an intellectual path how to evolve, how to work, how to be structured. So trying to do both, learning both the building a startup, NeurotechX, kind of like a company with all the legal, the financial, building a team, scaling, partnerships, all these things, and then doing the consulting, NeurotechX Services, and doing everything at once. It's been an incredible journey. I'm very glad and grateful of the last couple of years. Now it's definitely the time to just wrap up the PhD and move on. And that side of things for sure. Yeah. But NeurotechX has been a lot of very rewarding experience over the past couple of years for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's, as you said, it's not very efficient, especially the learning process is by definition not efficient. And so later on, you can optimize everything once you know it, but a priori, you don't necessarily know it. And that's something you get only through the wisdom and the pain of experience.
And even when you know it, you do the mistake again. And then after that, you integrate it. So at first, you do the mistake, you waste time, then you learn it, you know it, and then you do the mistake again. And then you're like, damn, I've repeated, but I learned. And then you might repeat it a third time. And then after that, you start, now it's in like, now, okay, stop doing that. That pattern doesn't work, or that works, so do that. And so, yeah, what I've learned is that you don't necessarily, you feel like you've learned it, but if you don't take the time to step back and reflect and put a framework around not doing the mistake again or doing the good thing again, it's easy to just move forward and learn things, but repeating the same mistakes again. So just learning it and assessing it is not, you need to digest it a bit more and really put in place some mechanisms, some framework that you don't repeat the mistakes that you know yourself, you're like more inclined to repeat. So yeah, you need to do the mistake a few times. And then after that, you stop doing it for real.
Yeah, for sure.
Unless you're really good and you at the first mistake that you don't do it again. But I believe that most people are a bit more like me, where you do the mistake a couple of times and then you're like, okay, stop doing it. And then you learn for real. And then you become more productive. But you need to go through that wasted time, which is a learning experience and learning journey.
If you're a masochist, you might continue to make those mistakes or just something like this. So Yannick, I think this has been really good, very interesting kind of talk through all of what NeurotechX does, how it came to be. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
So as I said, we have very different initiatives. So we talked about a few of them, like the chapters, the student clubs, NeurotechX Services, but we have published a book. So on Amazon, Neurotech Primer, it's an introductory book, 101, basically all the questions that we've had over the past couple of years of like, how can I get started? Where can I get a bit more information on this, on that? So if you go on Amazon, you'll see the Neurotech Primer, a book. It's a community effort. Another initiative, if you want to just keep tab on the field, the NeurotechX newsletter is I love the newsletter. I think it's packed with good stuff. Now the challenge that there is too much good stuff happening in neurotech, so it starts to be a bit overwhelming, but still the NeurotechX newsletter is a very good resource if you're interested in that. Neurotech EDU, you mentioned the course that the BCI guys, Colin and Harrison, put together, very high quality production videos. And if you want to learn, once again, it's a 101. We do a lot of intro 101 stuff because we believe that in the space there is way more inflow coming in the space and information. So we try to address that, but we're also but also addressing higher level. But for now, there's a lot of intro stuff that people interested in the space that want to learn more. There's a lot of resources with NeurotechX for these kinds of things. So either you can go on neurotechx.com and look at the different initiatives and see what resonate. You can always email us info@neurotechx.com. If you have a local NeurotechX community in your city, I definitely encourage you to keep an eye for the different the events. We're doing a big event online coming up in a few months, XR events. So it's going to be a big online event around AR, VR, and neurotech and biosensors. So keep an eye on that and follow us on social media, because we have just so many things that we're doing that you might not resonate with a few of them, but you will resonate with some others. And really, as I said earlier, NeurotechX is a journey. So you don't have to consume all NeurotechX now. We're going to 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, and we want to evolve with people in the space. A lot of the volunteers are coming to NeurotechX, giving their time, pushing some efforts, some initiatives, and then they get a good opportunity somewhere. They have to reduce their bandwidth, and then they come back 2 years later, give back. And it's really like a family, a funnel that we want people to evolve with at different capacity, different bandwidth and time. And if there is something that you wish that the field had and that as a community we could address, just send us an email. And as I said earlier, these are the requests that shapes NeurotechX. So if there's something that as a community we could do to have a greater impact in your career, in your journey in neurotech, please reach out and we'll be happy to try to address that need.
Excellent. Well, Yannick, this has been really interesting. Thank you so much for coming on.
Always a pleasure meeting you, talking to you. And I thank you for having me on the podcast.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.